twins. We're twins. Yes, sir. I am me. She is she. Except when I pretend I'm her. And when we switch, you can't tell which is which.
Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So I came across this very interesting episode of the Liz Wheeler podcast where she had independent journalist Karlyn Borysenko, who went to a socialist conference undercover. And she got in there, even though she's considered public enemy number one to the socialism movement. They became aware of who she is. And she managed to get into the conference, and she had a recording device in her pocket, a very small recording device. And she got a few audios of them, various speakers talking about their agenda and basically confirming a lot of what we already know, but it's also very eye-opening as to how they go about it. And they really believe what they say. It's pretty eye-opening. But to hear it from them directly, it's like, wow, these people really do have an agenda. It's not just a buzzword. There is a clear agenda, and a lot of it starts with the children. So I just want to react to a particular segment of the podcast. I encourage you to watch the full episode. I'll leave the link down below, and I will leave the link to Karlyn's YouTube channel too, where she's uploading more of these audios. And, she dressed a certain way. She put on glasses. Masks were mandatory at this conference, so she wore a mask, so that was easier for her to disguise herself. And she used a pseudonym. She didn't use her real name because, like she said, she's well known as public enemy number one on the socialism movement. And she's not exactly a conservative either. She doesn't identify as a conservative, but she agrees with a lot of conservative values. Because she had a recording device in her pocket, you have to listen very carefully and use the subtitles that they were kind enough to provide. So let's get into it.
Okay, I want to go on to the next clip because we do have a few of these that are all, I would say, equally as shocking. This one, we know this, but to hear it being spoken out of the mouth of a socialist, I think just helps orient us to how to fight back to this. This is a clip, if you could explain the context, where they're talking about how education, meaning the public school system, should be the primary tool used to transform a country into a socialist nation.
Yeah, so this was in a session against confronting the backlash against anti-racist education, and it just shows that they are hyper aware that education is the key to the kingdom. They are going, it's a trope, right, to say they're going after your kids, but they're going after your kids. They know that this is the key to building their socialist world, and so and they are hyper aware that the right is really focused on books, and so I want to emphasize for people, I understand why people have been focused on books. I understand there's pornographic material in books, but what you need to understand is that because the socialists know that the conservative right are focused on books, they're going over here. So they're going to the other side. They're going into policy, they're going into curriculum, they're getting into positions of power within the administration. And I think that this clip is really illustrative of that philosophy.
I'm seeing a huge struggle to maintain capitalism within the US and to not adopt a socialist system. That's my main observation. Is the US is moving more and more towards socialism. And people romanticize socialism. They talk about Sweden. They tried socialism a couple of times and it failed. And funny enough, when all the countries were locking down and practicing socialism, you can't work, you can't run your business, but we'll give you a check. When a lot of countries were practicing that, especially in the West, Sweden was one of the few who said no. The so-called socialist country were actually the ones who stayed open and continued living off of capitalism, making sure people still went to work. It's only the elderly who voluntarily decided to stay at home. Everyone else got on with it, and they were better off for it, funny enough. So that's what I'm seeing, and more states now are announcing that they're giving free school meals to children, to all children. That sounds lovely, but to me, that reeks of socialism. That's another step towards socialism. It's not free, number one, and that's just another way for the government to feed your children. Socialism takes away choice. It takes away choice. I mean, they're trying to ban gas stoves. That reeks of socialism or communism, where you don't even have a choice. If you read about countries that practice those things, people don't have a choice of what they eat. People can't own property. Now, the Biden administration is bragging about in such and such time, everyone will be driving electric cars. Again, communism.
Okay, let's play this clip. because this is the words from their mouths.
Wrap up by talking about why I think this struggle for anti-racist education right now should be a central fight for the left, for the socialist movement in this country, for everyone, and struggles for social justice. I think too often the left organizations have seen education as just one among many arenas of struggle, instead of seeing it as a centrally, strategically important struggle that has the potential to bring together tens of millions of people. When you think of everyone as a public school student, and all the parents, and all the educators who are unionized, this is like a key battle. Should have always been a major focus of those of us who want to transform the world and see a socialist society, as a site that can bring together millions of multiracial people together in a common struggle. But now that the far right has made it their number one way to in the struggle, I think we really have to see the urgency of focusing our movement around the struggle for anti-racist education. And I'll just end by saying that we're seeing that potential in some incredible fight back that's happened. But the reality is there's an incredible fight back happening, whether it's just classroom teachers who are refusing to lie to students even though the law says they have to, and they're doing what Jarvis Gibbons calls fugitive pedagogy.
So he's basically saying that education is the key to ushering in socialism. It sounds like anti-racist education, CRT, is one of their key strategies into bringing in socialism. If you make everything about a struggle, you can justify protests that lead to riots, that you can still class as peaceful, mainly peaceful. And you can destroy businesses, you can destroy communities, all under the guise of fighting the struggle. Because that's a way to destroy things. That's a way to destroy capitalism, destroying businesses, destroying communities. So that's education related to BLM, that's education related to CRT, all of which brings us closer towards a socialist society.
So this, Karlyn, I think is really important, not because parents aren't aware, not because citizens aren't aware that education is being used as indoctrination, but because I think a lot of people on the right feel that we have emerged victorious against critical race theory in the classroom because parents have taken over school boards, because states have passed laws banning this in the classroom. We feel, oh, this is an area of the culture war that we won. We actually did it. We eradicated this. And this kind of says, oh, wait a second. They're not giving up. They're actually just doubling down.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right about that, Liz. And you know, this is the thing. Again, school boards do not actually dictate curriculum in the vast majority of states. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. But this is also, socialists are not going to stop something just because a law tells them not to do it, right? That's their whole thing. They like the struggle. They like going up against diversity. And I think, again, they're hyper aware that this is their key battleground. The battleground that everyone needs to be paying attention to are the schools, and especially in regards to parental rights, about what's going on in those schools. But this is, you know, what I loved about this clip is it was so explicit that we are doing anti-racist education because we know it's our key to building a socialist world.
And they were talking about coming in from a place of authority. So being the teachers, being the governors, being on education boards, all the way from affecting legislation to being in the classroom itself. If a teacher wants to teach socialist ideas to your children, no one can really stop them because they're left to their own devices in the classroom. There's no camera in the classroom, there's no supervisor there. So they can essentially teach what they want. And it doesn't matter if the school is against it. It doesn't matter if the school has policies that say this is not allowed. Like she said, they don't care. Once they're in that classroom, they can teach whatever they choose to teach. As someone who worked in education myself, I'm definitely not on board with cameras in the classroom. You know, naturally I would be against something like that. But today, I understand that there's probably a need for it now.
That's why they're doing it. Another thing they talked about in a different clip that I haven't posted yet is all about this idea of teaching truthful history, which is what they say they're doing when they're teaching critical race theory. And essentially what they mean when they say we're teaching the true history or accurate history is they're teaching a far left interpretation of history that's always coming through this bias of collective struggle, which is how they frame it. And so I just, anytime you see Black Lives Matter curriculum showing up in schools, anytime you see social justice curriculum or anti-racist education or any of that, people need to be aware that it all leads back to this far left political ideology. And this is Marxism. This is communism.
Yeah, and that's what BLM are. They've made it clear that they're a Marxist communist organization. They don't even believe in the nuclear family. They don't even believe in family values. They're not promoting that. A lot of the money they raised, using dead black men to raise money to get people, pull at people's heartstrings to donate, was going towards trans organizations, LGBTQ organizations. And BLM is just another avenue to bring in this whole communistic ideology.
And they're going to the schools because if they can get your kids early enough, they know that it's dang near impossible to change their minds later.
It is, it's heartbreaking. So some of the language you said you said they speak a different language. They're technically speaking English, but they have their code words that they use. What are some of these code words that people should be on the lookout for?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked this question. Okay, so people need to understand that the four goals of the far left are always and forever the same. Gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. So I want to go through those four real quick because it will explain the language game they're playing. The first thing they do is gain power. So they get themselves into institutional power positions through getting jobs as teachers, administrators, principals, superintendents, politicians, what have you, so that they can control the system. They use the power that they gain in order to destabilize the system. That means they cause problems. They cause problems that cause people pain in society, whether that be fiery but mostly peaceful protests or critical race theory in the classroom or whatever it is. Their fundamental goal is always and forever to create chaos, to destabilize everything that we have built American society.
And we've seen examples of this, especially from 2020 with the whole BLM thing. We saw politicians encouraging people to go out there and protest, encouraging people to create chaos, to create a crowd.
You know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
You got to be ready to throw a punch. You have to be ready to throw a punch.
Donald Trump.
We have protesters taking up at their house. He's saying no peace, no sleep. No peace, no sleep. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And not just manslaughter, right? I mean...
Oh, no, not manslaughter. No. This is guilty for murder. I don't know whether it's in the first degree, but as far as I'm concerned, it's first degree murder.
Congresswoman, what happens if we do not get what you just told? What should the people do? What should protesters on the street do?
I didn't hear you.
What happens?
What should protesters do?
Well, we got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we need...
Encouraging people to create chaos. You only need to go on TikTok and you see these crazy leftist teachers talking about what they teach their kids with their pride flags in the classroom and all sorts of things. They're creating chaos in the classroom with what they're teaching the kids, and they're bragging about it. And we've seen the way they redefine things. They're always redefining things to cause confusion or to justify what they're doing. They label things, they redefine terminology, they use hyperbole to deliberately deceive people, to misrepresent what their goal is, or to demonize somebody. If they want to demonize a Republican governor like Ron DeSantis, they say that he's banning books. But when you go and read the legislation, it's completely different from the way they're presenting it. America doesn't ban books. That's what communists do. But actually what they're doing is saying that anything that is inappropriate for a child to be exposed to should not be in school. And that's something that we should all be able to agree on. But instead of admitting that, they say that Republicans are banning books. They say that Republicans are making it illegal for you to be gay or for teachers to be gay, things like that.
society on. Once they cause problems and destabilize things, and people are feeling pain based on those problems, they say capitalism is to blame for all of this. That is your big problem. Capitalism has caused all of the racist problems in this country. It's caused all the gender problems in this country. It's caused all of the inflation, all the inequality. So capitalism is the boogeyman. And then once they convince people that capitalism is the boogeyman, they say, how about Marxism? How about we try something new? And so that's what they're doing with every single tactic that they implement. So in terms of the language game that they're playing, anytime you hear the word whiteness, white supremacy, anti-racism, they are not talking about the color of your skin. They're talking about capitalism.
Interesting. And that makes sense why they label things that are considered good things. They label them white supremacy, like fitness. Fitness is white supremacy. Waking up early, that's white supremacy. I've seen articles saying that. Milk is white supremacy. When really, as she's saying, that's just code word for capitalism. And as much as people complain about having to get up early to go to work sometimes, ultimately, most people are grateful that they have a job and are able to pay their bills and are able to feed their families. But they will demonize that and say, that's white supremacy. The fact that you have to get up and go to work. They'll rather have people not have to work and just get a check every month. And all it comes down to is ultimately control. If somebody wants to take control of their own health, that's white supremacy. So they're going to demonize fitness. They don't want people to have that option. People don't get to decide what medicines they take. The government tells you this is what you need to take. These are the vaccines you need. If people have a certain condition and they decide to deal with it naturally, like lose weight, no, they want you to be on the diabetes medication that is sponsored by Big Pharma, set to make people billions. That doesn't matter. That capitalism's okay. It's not socialism for them. It's socialism for you. While they rake in millions promoting socialism, writing books, attending conferences, getting paid to be, speak at various events. Ultimately, they want control and power.
Because they believe that capitalism is the underlying problem to what they call systemic racism in this country. Capitalism built systemic racism. Capitalism created slavery. And so they believe that people who are white are the bourgeois. They are the landowners, the private property owners. They are the CEOs. The number one goal of socialists is to abolish private property. And that means your house. They don't want you to own your house. They don't want you to have a kitchen. When Joe Biden wanted to get rid of our stoves, that's actually a real socialist thing, that they're trying to get rid of private kitchens.
Yeah. They want to get rid of gas stoves. They already started it in New York, penalizing businesses for using gas stoves. We'll have no other options. We'll have to do everything that they say, because that's all it's about. It's about control.
They don't want you to have a car. They don't want you to have a business. And spoiler alert, your children are considered private property too. And they don't want that to exist either. So that's a different thing we should pick up on in a second. But whiteness always means capitalism. This is why we see headlines in the Washington Post about multiracial whiteness. This is why the Los Angeles Times called Larry Elder the black face of white supremacy. It's not about skin color at all. So that's a trick that they play very, very often.
They're perfectly happy to call a black person the face of white supremacy when you don't fall in line with their ideology. And that's textbook. They label people who don't fall in line with what they believe. They label people who they believe are enemies. Whether you're black, white, Asian, they don't care. It's all white supremacy, which again is code word for capitalism. Interesting.
Which I think we've all heard that. I mean, we laugh at the Larry Elder example is probably the most apropos example. You're like, how can a black man be a white supremacist? Or remember that those 5 cops, I think it was in Tennessee, either early this year or late last year, and they essentially beat to death a black man. They were 5 black cops, and yet they were told that this was a white supremacist violence. And we were like, wait a second, the police chief is black, these 5 cops are black. This was obviously an egregious crime, beating this guy, but what did race have to do with it? And the left were not deterred. They were like, no, this is an institution of white supremacy because the police is supposed to protect private property from your person to the things that you own. So keep an ear out, guys, for these terms.
So yeah, there you have it. Anything that promotes law and order is white supremacy. So even if you're a black cop, even Larry Elder brought this up on the Breakfast Club when he spoke about Baltimore and the killing of Freddie Gray. Everybody involved was black, including the president. All the powers that be that were linked to this case the police, the chief of police, the mayor, they were all black. Yet, it was still put down to white supremacy. But she's saying that when they label people these things, when they say it's white supremacy, they're talking about the channels that promote capitalism. And anybody who is linked to those systems of capitalism can be labeled a white supremacist, even if they're not white. And even if they're not a racist, they can still be labeled those things because you're in the system of capitalism. And I encourage you to watch the rest of the podcast. There is a speaker who appears to be trying to justify the sexualization of children. When a parent says, this is my child and I make the decisions for my child, they don't like that idea because they believe you're treating children like property and they should have their own autonomy and they should be able to make the decisions that they want to make for themselves, even as children. That's treating children like property and you don't own them. But they're perfectly happy to own your children. It's very sick and disturbing. So when we're talking about the books that they want in school, again, they're deliberately trying to sexualize children, deliberately. So again, I ask people, when you promote these things and you talk about, oh, the Republicans are banning books, do you know what you're supporting? Do you actually know what you're supporting? You're supporting a socialist, communist agenda that doesn't want parents to have ownership over their children. They don't want parents to be in charge of their children, basically. They want to be in charge of your children. That's what you're supporting. It's not just about Democrats and liberals and conservatives. It's much bigger than that. When people demonize fossil fuels without doing their own research, fossil fuels that we all rely on, and even these alternatives that they're promoting rely on fossil fuels. When people act as if we can just get rid of fossil fuels tomorrow and the world will be a better place and we will save the environment, you're going along with a false narrative that is only there to promote an agenda, to say that you can't own anything, you can't make decisions about what car you drive, and it's a very dangerous slippery slope that we are now on. It's to ensure that people no longer have autonomy over their own lives. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you watched the episode too. And thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. And God willing, I will see you in the next video.